In a bold move, US Congressman Jim Jordan is demanding Australia's eSafety Commissioner Julie Inman Grant to testify before Congress next month, accusing her of enforcing a foreign censorship regime that jeopardises American free speech. For more, let's head to Melbourne. We're joined by Professor Chris Berg from RMIT University. Good to see you. What are the implications of Australia's Online Safety Act for free speech in the US? What's the connection?
Well, they're quite significant. So the eSafety Commissioner has done a few things that the US government and many people in the US interpret as having threatened US freedom of speech. So, for example, the eSafety Commissioner has in the past tried to censor material not just for Australian citizens, but to impose global takedown internet content orders under the justification that Australians might use VPNs or virtual private networks to pretend to be in another jurisdiction. And the only way then to get rid of content for Australians is to get rid of it for the entire world. In addition, of course, we're talking about the eSafety Commissioner regulating American-owned technology companies as well. So the US is very concerned about that. And I will also add that many of the ideas that we invent in Australia tend to be taken up by other jurisdictions as well. So I think the US is very concerned about that.
Yes, very much so. The eSafety Commissioner talked to us about how she's trying to influence global content regulation.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem. So we have a habit in Australia of forging new proposals, forging new legislative frameworks, and those being picked up by foreign jurisdictions, particularly the United Kingdom, which has taken many of the ideas that we've established in Australia and started to implement them on their own terms. In fact, there are US states that are even thinking of introducing things like the under 16 social media ban that is about to come into effect in Australia as well. So I think what happens in Australia, it doesn't just affect Australians, it affects many other countries as well, even if it's just as an example. And US people in the United States who are worried about freedom of speech are quite rightly worried about what we in Australia are doing to restrict our speech, because it might have downstream effects on them.
What was it exactly that led to the request from that Congressman Jim Jordan for the eSafety Commissioner to testify before Congress? Do we know?
So there's a few things. So they've released a public letter offering this request up. The first thing was this idea that there are global takedown orders, that the eSafety Commissioner is not just trying to censor Australia's internet, but it's also trying to censor the world's internet. This has quite rightly got the Americans a bit upset. The other part of it is the eSafety Commissioner's participation in global forums, particularly global forums hosted in the United States, urging, advocating, and trying to coordinate regulators around the world in the United States, in Europe, and of course in Australia, to increase or to increase their enforcement of global of censorship regimes as well. So I think the eSafety Commissioner at least sees herself as, or is seen around the world as, a bit of a thought leader in the space of global censorship. So the United States is keen to learn what that implications would have for American free speech.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? And it's a double-edged sword. I guess it's similar to the film industry, where Americans have been making films for a long time. Countries like Australia still have film review boards to decide what sort of rating those films should get, or if they should be banned for distaste or whatever it might be. Some would see that as censorship. But on these platforms, the world could end up having no borders at all if people can do anything they want on these American-based platforms. Does it make sense for a territorial government like the Commonwealth of Australia to say, hey, there are limits here? Where does it go too far and where is it not enough?
Well, they can say that there are limits, but I think this experience really shows what the limits of those limits might be. Ultimately, we do have an open internet. There are ways that you can look like you're browsing the internet from different countries. So we can block certain content in Australia, but people might choose to use virtual private networks, VPNs, to appear to be from other countries. And I don't think there's anything that functionally can be done to really seriously stop that, sort of short of a sort of Chinese Great Firewall approach, which of course would be terrible for economic freedom and liberty. So in that environment, I think policymakers have to be very modest about what they can do when it comes to internet censorship, even if they think it's a good idea. And I should be really clear, I think this is a terrible idea. I don't think we should be trying to censor Australian internet access, but even if we decide that we do, we've got to be modest about our ability to do so.
It is funny, Stephen Conroy during the Gillard government tried the same thing as communications minister when it came to online pornography and deciding what people could or couldn't watch. I was in a room with him as he was trying to explain to us all what his view was, and it became pretty clear that was his view. How can you balance online safety and free speech, and who should be the judge?
I think the judge has to be the users themselves. I think in the case of the under 16 social media ad ban, I've got kids under the age of 16, and I would much rather make decisions about their access of the internet myself rather than have the government make those decisions for me. But generally speaking, I think that we should treat adults as adults. We should treat the internet as it is a global network. It is managed by global rules, and I think Australian governments need to understand that they are very small players in a large global network. There are enormous benefits from having free speech. There are enormous benefits from having this global network. And I think focusing on those benefits rather than focusing on more distant risks, I think would be the right approach.
Is it because the Australian government is just getting so big and trying to essentially insert itself into so many things? We think about nicotine and the plain packaging tobacco, which has backfired. Now people aren't paying tax, they're getting $10 packs. And we've had 150 fire bombings in Melbourne alone of tobacco stores because now there's an underworld war. All started with good intentions, but as we play it out and see the actual real life ramifications, what do you think they could be when it comes to safety online?
I mean, I think that's right. So good intentions are just not enough. I understand the desire for politicians to do popular things. That's not surprising, and obviously they get bumps in polls and so forth. But ultimately, we have to think about not just the intention of policy, but what the downstream consequences might be. What are the unintended consequences of those policies? In the case of plain packaging and tobacco taxes, it turns out that's launched an enormous underground war. In the case of censoring the internet, the attempt to censor the internet in a way that is unavoidable has created enormous diplomatic challenges with the United States. I think we need to recognize not just the importance of free speech, but the importance of being modest with regulating foreign-owned and foreign-run companies. Now, if we want to regulate Australian companies, well, we should be setting up an environment where we can have tech giants too. We can have Australian-based technology giants. But in Australia, we're so focused on regulation, we're so focused on taxation that we have to go overseas for our technology companies, and that creates this problem.
Yeah, very much so. Do you see it as being a flashpoint between President Trump and the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese? Obviously, they caught up, very jovial, very happy, talking about AUKUS and everything in common. But Australia seems to be a bit of a thorn in the side of US tech companies, and those tech giants are pretty close to the White House.
This is a really big open question at the moment. Obviously, the Albanese government thinks that because they had a great meeting, because Albanese and Donald Trump had a great meeting, that everything's great, and so they can regulate as much as they like. I wouldn't be putting my money on that relationship remaining permanently fixed. I think there's a lot of tech companies that are talking to the Trump administration right now, quite rightly expressing their frustration with the Australian government's actions in this space. And it wouldn't surprise me in the next couple of days or next couple of weeks if the Trump administration says some pretty big things opposing much of our tech regulation. There's word on the street that there's going to be even more tech regulation announced by the Albanese government over coming months as well. And I think that puts us in a very risky position with our relationship with the United States.
All right, Professor Chris Berg from RMIT, thanks so much for joining us on Ticker. Thank you.
Thank you so much.